It's the Wilk Report. I'm Michael Wilk, coming to you from Cleveland, Ohio. Was able to download the second episode of Jordan Peele's iteration of The Twilight Zone, Nightmare at 30,000 Feet, on CBS No Access. No access because they want you to go behind a paywall for it, and if you can't afford it or you just don't want to spend the money because there's only 2 new shows on the all-access streaming service, and one of them is utter crap, well, yeah, I can't blame you. So, anyway, let's get down to business. This episode was actually a lot better, in my opinion, than the previous one. Although it does suffer, as the comedian did, from too long of a running time, which resulted in a lot more story padding than I thought was necessary. But overall, I think it had a lot of strength here. Now, the setup here is kind of similar to the classic Twilight Zone episode, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, written by Richard Matheson. This episode was written by Marco Ramirez, based on a story by Simon Kinberg, Jordan Peele, and Marco Ramirez. And the basic premise is a man who's scared of flying, realizes that the plane he's on is going to crash very soon, and he's trying to stop it, but ultimately makes the plane go down anyway. Essentially causing the very thing he's trying to prevent. But it does it in a very different way from what Serling did, because the episode that was penned by Richard Matheson had some kind of like woolly gremlin-like creature taking apart the plane. In this instance, it borrows a lot more heavily from classic episodes of The Twilight Zone, where people's fears and paranoia are the real monster. And, I thought it handled it quite brilliantly. So anyway, let's get down to this story. We've got Justin Sanderson, played by Adam Scott. He is an investigative reporter struggling from PTSD, from things that have happened in his past. He's going through TSA. He's, kind of bored. He's frustrated. He's really not at all patient with the Orwellian measures he has to go through just to get on the plane. And we are shown that, being a journalist, he's written about the lack of civility in public discourse, which, if this is a broader message about why we should calm down and not go all nuts when discussing politics, I'm not sure it's a message I really agree with, because in my opinion, there's actually far too much bipartisanship and civility between the two major political parties, where the Democrats basically go along with whatever the Republicans want them to do because they're afraid of looking hyper-partisan or not getting anything done. And they don't seem to realize that, just because things are getting done doesn't mean that they're good things or constructive things. In fact, whenever Democrats and Republicans get together and shelve their partisan theatrics, more often than not, it's bad things that happen. So, like the USA Patriot Act, the Iraq War. I mean, you name it. The Democrats have gone along with it over the past 15, 20 years. And that's not a good thing at all. And so I think there does need to be a lot less civility going on and a lot more opposition to Republican policies. But as a micro story about how fear and paranoia and anger can ultimately destroy us and lead to tragedy, I think this is, a surprisingly well told tale. So anyway, Sanderson boards the flight. He's bored. He's having anxiety from his PTSD. Finds an MP3 player, puts it on, and it's playing a podcast called Enigmatique, hosted by a guy named Rod Edwards, voiced by Dan Carlin. Now, Sanderson is disturbed when the show begins describing things that are actually taking place on the flight, and ends up predicting that the plane will go down in an hour. So naturally, this has him very disturbed, and the only one who seems to believe him is a fellow passenger and former pilot named Joe Beaumont, played by Chris Diamantopoulos. Joe's the only one who believes him. So Justin tries listening for clues in the podcast to try and prevent the crash from happening, but his every attempt to get to the bottom of the things and warn passengers, not only does each attempt fall on deaf ears, but it also ends up, pissing people off, frightening them, frustrating the crew, upsetting the captain, who's not having any of it. So, things look pretty bleak here for our hero, and he's starting to wonder, look, am I just crazy? But eventually Joe and Justin manage to take over the plane. Joe's the obvious choice to pilot it because, he is a former pilot. But as it turns out, this is not such a good idea because he's a raging alcoholic. And he proves incapable of piloting the plane, which sends the passengers into a panic. It's like, yeah, I'm too drunk to know what the fuck I'm doing. I'm just going to sit here and die. Yeah, maybe I should have thought of that before you had the burnt out drunk take over the plane, huh, Justin? But anyway, plane goes down. Justin wakes up on a desert island, picking up the MP3 player, which he finds on the beach. He discovers from the podcast that all the passengers and crew on the flight have miraculously survived. And there's only one exception, and that is Joe himself, who disappeared without any trace. Because the rest of the people who are on the airliner are understandably upset with him and take their frustrations out on him rather permanently. So, there's a nice little moral to the story here that, don't be a dick and let your fears and paranoia get the better of you, because you will end up suffering the consequences. So, like I said, I mean, this, had a lot of feel of the classic Twilight Zone, where you've got tragic irony, so Oedipal undertones where the guy trying to prevent a disaster ends up making it happen because he doesn't know the specific circumstances that lead to that disaster. So, I mean, just very well written. Like I said, I think the one complaint I have about the episode is that the bloody thing just drags on too long, and there's, some pacing issues. And I understand they're trying to do an hour format, but the original story was written to fill a half-hour format, and when you have that kind of limitation, it kind of forces you to cut out all the unnecessary BS and just get straight to the point, So, yeah, I think that's something that Peele and his writing crew are going to need to work on here. But I have to say, I'm pleasantly surprised by this because, given the unmitigated garbage heap that is STD, which is created by people who hate Star Trek for people who don't like Star Trek, it's pretty clear, again, as I mentioned in my previous episode, that Jordan Peele has a great deal of love and respect for the Twilight Zone, and he's actually trying to tell the kinds of stories that Rod Serling told, but in a way that is a little bit newer and fresher and up to date. And I think the thing that could actually make this show last more than one or two seasons is if Peele continues Rod Serling's tradition of telling pull no punches, social political commentary, because we kind of need that in today's television. If you watch MASH, starting with the original film by Robert Altman, and then the TV show, there's a lot of social and political commentary that I think we're missing now and needs to be heard. I just wish that Peele would abandon the hour-long format and focus for now on half-hour stories that are well edited and well paced, because the last thing you want to do is cause audiences to be bored, and people have much shorter attention spans today than they did 60 years ago. So, I think you really need to kind of tighten up the storytelling here and, really eliminate a lot of the excess stuff that could potentially bring this show down. But, in terms of the quality here, I'm not complaining, though. I mean, we're getting a lot of care and attention. We're getting a lot of Easter eggs thrown in. A replica of the prop mask from the original Nightmare at 20,000 Feet is shown, and I think that was a nice touch. You're kind of doing an homage to the original while at the same time doing something that's newer and different from that original. And I think it mostly works here. So, that's pretty much it. Let me know what you think. Do you agree, disagree? Did you like the episode? Did you not like it? Why or why not? I want to hear from you. Post in the comments, or if you want to head over to my Discord channel, leave your opinion there. I'm more than willing to engage in discussion. Just be sure to keep it civil, and, I'll be civil back. If you like what you've heard and you want to hear more, hit the subscribe button and the bell icon to receive notifications whenever we upload new content. And if you want to help support the podcast, please head over to our Patreon or Subscribe Star page. Become a donor, get the rewards listed in the sidebars. That way we can bring you new content, more content, and actually, you know what? Feel free to let us know what you want to see reviewed. Because I'm reviewing Peele's Twilight Zone revival. I'm reviewing the Orville. I want to do some anime reviews here. But if there's something you want to see reviewed, let me know. Because this show is as much for you as it is for me, and I certainly don't mind broadening my horizons. Anyway, that's all for now. Until next time, this is Michael Wilk for the Wilk Report, saying take care, good night, I'm out of here.